All right, hello everybody and welcome to second semester. We're going to be looking at linear equations and finding y-intercept from all representations. So you have this video and then you have a note sheet. We're going to go back and forth for a brief second and then we'll stay on the note sheet. But first off, we want to look at there are 4 different types of representations for linear functions. That is equations, graphs, tables, and stories. Again, equations is something we've seen before. It is set up in y equals mx plus b, or like y equals 2x plus 6. Graphs, pretty self-explanatory. It'll look like a graph with a straight line on it somewhere. Tables, remember you always have an x and a y column, followed by numbers and a pattern. And then stories, word stories that we can pull information out of to form any of these other representations. All of these go hand in hand. You can make a table from a graph. You can make a graph from a table. You can make a table from an equation or a graph from an equation. They all kind of interchange with each other. So if you want to hop to your Word document, it should look something like this. We're going to go ahead and fill in the blanks. So how can you represent a linear function? We talked about those 4 ways. We have equations, graphs, tables, and stories. So go ahead and take a second and make sure you have those filled in. We have equations, graphs, tables, and stories. Oops, sorry. So those 4. All right. So looking at our linear function equation, we resorted to it here in the PowerPoint. We're going to have y equals mx plus b. So I'm going to go back, and I'm just going to add that to my notes in this box of y equals mx plus b. We're going to go ahead and mark this up a little bit. 2 parts here. We have the mx, so we'll talk about that first. That's going to stand for slope. So go ahead and put slope. We're going to deal with slope next week. We're going to focus on y-intercept this week. But I figured we might as well go ahead and break down the whole equation. And slope always has an x. And m equals movement. That'll come more in handy when we talk about our stories or our word problems. But you can remember slope always has the x. That is kind of the easiest way to go about it. Slope always has the x. And then for b, we have our b. And that's what we're going to be focused on today. B is the y-intercept or Y-Int. And that is going to be the number by itself. So it doesn't have an x. And it's going to be when x equals 0, we have our y-int or y-intercept. And the last part is where a line crosses the y-axis. And we'll talk about that as we move on and look at graphs. So we have this information about the y-intercept and slope. Again, today we're just going to be focusing here on the y-intercept. Next week we'll talk about slope. So we're going to go ahead and start by finding the y-intercept of an equation. Now to do that, we have to have an equation. So we're going to look here. We have y equals 2x plus 3. And if we look at our notes, we know the y-intercept is the number by itself. It's usually at the end. And that's what we kind of need to know for when we look at equations. Because we know equations, our number that's next to x is always going to be our slope, which makes our y-intercept the other number. In this case, we have a plus 3 at the end, so our y-intercept is a positive 3. And we'll go back at, and we always like to write these as ordered pairs as well. Remember, we'll always have an x and a y. Anytime we find y-intercept, our x is going to be 0. So in this case, it would be 0, 3. And we'll talk about that here in a second. We'll just get used to writing it that way. Our second one, again, set up the same way. We want the number by itself. In this case, we have a -5. And again, if we write that in slope-intercept form, we have 0, -5, which are x and our y. And then go ahead and take a second, pause the video, and fill out the last two. Okay, welcome back. You should have the last two filled out. I'll walk through those again. We need the number by itself. In this case, it's going to be a +2 or 0, 2. The last one, again, the number by itself, we have a +9 or 0, 9. So it's pretty straightforward for finding y-intercept from an equation. It's the number by itself, usually at the end if it's written in slope-intercept form. We're going to go ahead and skip that second box so you can go on to page 2. As you can see, that I've already got some stuff highlighted. We're going to worry about the first box for each question only. So we'll go through those. Again, I'm going to do the two problems, the first two with you guys, and then I'm going to turn you guys loose to finish the last 4. So let's go ahead and make some mental notes when graphing. So when solving for a graph, the y-intercept is where the line crosses the y-axis, which the y-axis is going to be up and down. So what that means is we have two axes here. We have this one that goes up and down. That's going to be our y. And this one here goes side to side. That's going to be our x. So we only want to focus on where our red line crosses the up and down line. So what I like to do is how I just kind of did, I like to run my pencil along the line until I find that dot. In this case, it's right here, and I kind of covered up that number. It's on 3. Now again, y-intercept is always going to be when x equals 0. And this will make more sense when graphing because if we start at 0, 0, our x value is left and right. And to get to that dot that we just made, we don't have to move left or right any. We're going to go straight up. So your x is always going to be 0. In this case, we crossed at 3. So our y is going to be 3. So our y-intercept for this equation is 0, 3. Moving on to our second one, you notice this one doesn't have numbers. That's all right. We can count boxes. And we'll have an x and a y, and we automatically know that x is going to be 0. I see my dot here, so I need to go up 1, 2, just a coincidence. I went up 3 again. 3 is where I cross that up and down axis, or our y-axis. So I have our y-intercept is 0, 3 again. So now if you would, pause this video and complete the last 4. Again, remember, you only have to find the y-intercept, so that first box of each problem. Go ahead and complete those, and then come back and check your work. Welcome back. I hope you figured out what our y-intercepts are. Let's go ahead and take a look. Again, we want to figure out where we cross this up and down line. I notice it's right there, and I know it's always going to be 0, something. In this case, 1, 2. I went up 2, so I'm going to have 0, 2. I see we cross right here on my y-axis. I'm going to have 0, 4. Moving on to the bottom 2. Again, my y-axis I have here. Draw that line up and down. I have 0, 3. And 0, 3 and 0, 4 are hot numbers today. And our last one, again, we have our x and our y. Draw my line. There's my dot, and I covered up that number again. It is 4, so 0, 4, and that's my x and y. So finding y-intercept, pretty self-explanatory. It's where our line's going to cross that up and down line, that up and down axis, which is the y-axis. All right, so the last part we have is moving on to tables. With tables, we are going to make a couple of notes as well. Tables, pairs are side to side. And pairs will always be an x and a y. And then to find the Y-Int, we need to look for when x equals 0, the y next to it equals the Y-Int. So when x is 0, whatever number's in the y column next to that 0 is going to be our y-intercept. So this one goes pretty fast if there's an x within the column. Again, we're only going to focus on the first question, which I've gone ahead and highlighted. So let's go ahead and look. So I'm going to look straight down my x's. We get lucky on this first one. The 0 is the first number. And remember, when we find y-intercept, x is always going to be 0. Straight across from 0 in this case will be 4. So my y-intercept is going to be 0, 4. Looking at this next one, we get lucky again. 0 is our first number. Straight across is 1, so I have 0, 1. And again, that's an x and a y. So go ahead, pause the video after those first two. I know those were quick. Again, you're going to find where x is 0 and look straight across from where 0 is, and that'll be your y-intercept. You have 3 more problems to complete for today's notes. Again, hold on to this piece of paper. We will use this next week, and this will kind of be your cheat sheet for the rest of this unit. So go ahead and pause the video now and complete the final 3. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Hopefully you've completed those final 3, and we can go over them. Again, remember, we're going to write an x and a y. I have a -2. That's not what I need. -1, that's not what I need. There's my 0. I'm going to look straight across. In this case, it's 10. Again, I have my 0 to start. I'm going to look straight across. This one's going to be -10, x and y. And highlight that for you. Last but not least, 16, that's not a 0. 8, that's not a 0. 4, that's not a 0. There's my 0. It's the last number here. I'm going to look straight across, and I'll have 0, 3. Again, x and y. So we found our y-intercept from a table. Once my paper loads, from a graph. And last but not least, from an equation. Like I said, please hold on to this paper. Keep it safe. We will use this not only today, not only next week, but the rest of the unit as kind of a reference guide. It's kind of the start. So please hold on to this. You will need to upload your note sheet to Canvas. Once that's uploaded, you'll get like a completion grade for it, a little check mark to make sure you've got it done, because this is super important to have. So if you have any issues with that, please email me, let me know, and we can figure out what's the problem and get your pictures uploaded.